welcome back again. Namo Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Pashtaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nivishesha Shunyavadi Paschata Deshatarne. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. So, we are returning to our lecture series on our beloved Sri Vrindavan Dham. It's good to be back again. Essentially to our wandering through the 12 forests of Vrindavan. Of course, the word wandering in English may not have the best connotation. The dictionary meaning of wandering is, quote, traveling aimlessly from place to place. Traveling aimlessly from place to place. But we are not wandering aimlessly in the Vrindavan forest through our series of lectures, through Shabda Brahma. In fact, we have a fixed goal in our wanderings. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita 2:41, Vyavasa yatmika buddhir ekeha kuru nandana. Quote, those who are on this path are resolute in purpose, and their aim is one. And their aim is one, unquote. And what is our aim as aspiring Brajabasis? What is our aim in wandering in Vrindavan in the way which we are? That aim's made very clear by Srila Prabodhananda Saraswati in his illustrious Vrindavan Mahima Murita, Shataka 1, verse 47. And I quote, where do living entities easily attain Krishna? Where are the wonderful transcendental pastimes of Lord Krishna found? And where can one see the highest form of bliss due to worshipping the lotus feet of Krishna? Oh brothers, just listen as I tell you the secret. Everything is available in this abode of Vrindavan, unquote. Of course, no sane man or woman would ever wander through a forest alone. And in our wanderings through the forests of Vrindavan, we have the perfect guides. We have Srila Prabhupada, and we have our previous acharyas. In fact, we have many devotees living here today in Vrindavan, like Dinabandhu, who's been taking devotees on Parikrama for many, many years, and Bhakti Chaitanya Maharaj comes here as well, and of course Radhanath Swami. So we have our guides. Most important is to understand that it's actually the spiritual master who reveals the Dham to his disciples. This is made very clear by Srila Raghunath Das Goswami in his Mukta Charita, wherein he says, Namashestram manu api sachiputram atta surupam rupam tasyagrajam uruparim matarim goshtavatim Radakundam girivaram maho radhika madhavasam prapto yasya pratita kripaya shiguram tam atoshmi. A beautiful verse. Quote, I offer my respectful obeisances unto my spiritual master, who reveals the holy name, Lord Chaitanya, Swarup Damodar Goswami, Rupa Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, the holy Dham, Radhakund, Govardhan Hill, and Shishi, Radha and Krishna in Vrindavan, unquote. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur has also described the spiritual master as the revealer of the Dham. That we find in his list of the 10 offenses to the Dham, which one should be very careful not to commit. And he lists the very first offense as to disrespect one's spiritual master who reveals the Dham to his disciple. And of course, he goes on to list other offenses as well, some of which are to think that the Holy Dham is temporary, to commit violence towards any of the residents of the Holy Dham or to any of the pilgrims who come there, or to think that any of them are ordinary people, to perform mundane activities while living in or visiting the Dham, to earn money by commercializing deity worship and Sankirtan in the Dham, like that. He goes on. But for us today, we will focus on Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's statement that it is the spiritual master who reveals the Dham. We often say that a saintly person, he sees with his ears, not through his eyes. So we hear from Sri Guru to understand what is the mysteries of the Dham. The spiritual master is considered a representative of Balaram, who we know is famous as the original guru. In Srimad Bhagavatam 10:2-8, Krishna says, Sheshakyam Dhamma Mamakam. Shesha is my Dham. And as we know, Lord Ananta Shesha is an expansion of Lord Balaram. So when we come to the Dham, it's essential that we take shelter of the spiritual master and our previous acharyas, again, to properly understand the glories of the Dham. There's a common saying that when one goes to the Dham, he should associate and understand the Dham through the holy persons who live there. And both their lives and their teachings can reveal everything about the Dham to us. So, as we enter back into Sri Vrindavan Dham to wander with a purpose, I would like to share with you the life and teachings of a Gaudiya Vaishnava who, although perhaps lesser known, may still be a source of great inspiration for us. Obviously, there are many known and unknown Vaishnavas through the annals of time, all of whom we can take shelter of. Srila Prabhupada writes to this effect in his purport to Srimad Bhagavatam 1:1:1, the first verse. Quote, he writes, within the past 500 years, many erudite scholars and acharyas like Jiva Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, Ballabhacharya, and many other distinguished scholars, even after the time of Lord Chaitanya, made elaborate commentaries on the Bhagavatam. Many other distinguished scholars, even after the time of Lord Chaitanya, made elaborate commentaries on the Bhagavatam, and the serious student would do well to attempt to go through them to better relish the transcendental messages, unquote. So in my studies in the Vrindavan Research Institute, I came across one such pure devotee, whose name is Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami. Now, Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami was born sometime in the late 1500s. This we know for certain because he was one of the signatories, meaning one of the persons who signed Srila Jiva Goswami's last will and testament in the year 1608. Srila Jiva Goswami compiled his will, and to make it authorized, he asked certain persons to come and sign along with him, important personalities. And there in his will we find the signature of Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami. He is also mentioned in the Vaishnav Shastra, which we referred to a few times during the year, called Bhakta Mal. The Bhakta Mal was compiled by the author Nabhadas, and it was recommended by Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur as an authorized source of Vaishnava biographies. In fact, that is what the Bhakta Mal is. It's just listing so many different Vaishnavas, actually through thousands of years. So Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he considered it an authorized scripture of Vaishnava biographies, wherein we find Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami. I found that it was actually recommended as one of the books to study in the Gaudiya Math during the time of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, if anyone wanted to know the biography of any particular acharya. Now we should note here, there's another Bhaktamal written in Bengali by one Lal Das, and that book was rejected by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur as a Sahaja book. So Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami is in the Bhakta Mal edition of Nabhadas. Now most significantly, as we begin to reveal the glories of this devotee, Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami was a disciple. He became a disciple of Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, one of the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan. And as you may remember, Raghunath Bhatta Goswami was especially famous for his discourses, for his lectures on the Bhagavatam. That was his seva to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu while in Vrindavan. And after his departure from this world, his disciple, Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami, carried on with the same tradition. He was he would lecture every day at Govindadev's temple on Srimad Bhagavatam. Like father, like son. Now, it's interesting that Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami was from a family of Brahmanas in South India, and he lived in Andhra Pradesh. Now, while growing up there, he somehow or other became very attached to Vrindavan Dham, which is pretty far away. And there's no explanation given that I could find that how so far from Vrindavan, he became very attached to Vrindavan and Krishna, of course. Some scholars I read, they say perhaps he became attached to Braj by hearing from Vrindavan sadhus, who may have passed through, Andhra Pradesh as he was growing up. In those days, Vaishnava saints and sages were traveling all around India to propagate the glories of the holy name. That was the order of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, every town and village. So as Mahaprabhu traveled and propagated the holy name, so did his followers at that time. Anyway, somehow Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami achieved love for Krishna. In fact, by the time he was a young man, he was famous for his Krishna-conscious poetry, much of which, interestingly enough, he was writing in the Braj Bhasa language. Braj Bhasa language is very beautiful, but is basically just spoken here in Vrindavan. So yes, this is interesting, isn't it? He was writing in the Braj Bhasa language. Now, how he eventually came to Vrindavan from South India, it's really interesting. And I'll share that story with you. Pastime. Now, after Govindaji's temple was completed in Vrindavan, it took many, many years, as you remember, and his worship was going on, Srila Jiva Goswami would go to the Mangal Artik of Radha Govinda every morning. He was the leading acharya of the Gaudiya Vaishnavas at that time because by that time Rupa and Sanatana Goswamis had departed for Goloka. So Jiva Goswami, every morning he'd go to Mangal Artik, and then after the Mangal Artik of Govindaji, he would go to Radha Gopinath's Mangal Artik, and then he would go to Radha Madan Mohan's Mangal Artik. These 3 Mangal Artiks were scheduled at different times to enable devotees to attend all 3. And tradition says that by seeing these 3 deities, which we mentioned in a previous lecture, are the 3 deities we approach as Vaishnavas to advance in Krishna consciousness one by one, tradition says that by seeing all 3 deities, Govinda, Gopinath, and Madan Mohan, in one day, all one's sins are destroyed. And this tradition, actually, of visiting these 3 deities in a day, it said it came from Jiva Goswami. That's what he did, and it You know, whatever a great person does, the common person will follow in his footsteps, as Krishna says in Gita. So he was one of the most illustrious personalities living at that time. So devotees followed suit. And even today, some devotees still observe this tradition by driving from Vrindavan to Karoli, which is a good drive, to see Madan Mohan, and then on to Jayapur, which is quite a drive, to see Govindaji and Gopinath. So one day, after taking darshan of Govindaji, Jiva Goswami was walking down the stairs of the temple on his way to see Gopinath, when he observed a very saintly person sitting at the bottom of the stairs. Now this saintly person was singing a very beautiful Brajbhasa song, which is famous even today. It's known as Saki Hon Sham Ranga Rangi. Saki Hon Sham Ranga Rangi. Meaning, quote, the title means, "O beloved Saki, I have been transformed by the color of Sham Krishna." Saki Hon Sham Rang Rangi. O beloved Saki, I have been transformed by the color of Sham Krishna. Actually, I'll recite the whole song. This is so beautiful. Jiva Goswami was mesmerized by hearing this song, so we should take a moment to hear it as well. It goes like this. Not in the Braj Bhasa language, of course, but translation is, "O Saki, I have been transformed by the colors of Sham. On seeing his beautiful form, I sold my soul to him. I lost myself in his beauty. When I fall asleep, I lose myself in dreams of him. And when I awake, I don't see anything as separate from him. It is as though my eyes have been trapped by his form, like a bumblebee trapped at night in a lotus flower. When I hear that he has gone to graze his cows, I don't know of what Kanai people are talking about, for he is always with me. But who will listen to me? Who will believe me when I say, it's all nonsense, he's here with me? How can Gadadhar explain any of this? I'm like a dumb person trying to explain the taste of gur." Unquote. That's what Jiva Goswami heard. He stopped. He was stunned. It said that he couldn't move, actually. So when that saint had finished singing, Jiva Goswami came to him and said, who, Sadhu, Baba, who wrote this? Did you write this beautiful poetry? And the saint replied, "Oh no, I was coming from South India to Vrindavan when I met a saintly person known as Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami, a very nice devotee of Krishna. He composed these beautiful verses." So Jiva Goswami said, "But if he lives in South India, how can he write such beautiful poetry without even coming to Sri Vrindavan Dham, the place where one appreciates the color of Krishna? Worship of the Lord in South India is in the mood of awe and reverence, Aishwarya Bhav, where the glories of Shri Radha are not sung." Where the glories of Shri Radha are not sung. I am very interested to know how this exalted devotee, Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami, wrote this beautiful poetry without coming here. Do you know anyone who can deliver a letter to him from me and bring him back here to Vrindavan? So the saintly person said, "Oh yes, I have 2 Brahmana friends who can render the service for you. They can deliver your letter to Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami in South India." So that night, Jiva Goswami spent much of the night writing a letter to Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami. And the next day, he delivered that letter to the saintly person. Now in that letter, Jiva Goswami quoted the first verse from Raghunath Das Goswami's book, Sva Sankalpa Prakasha Stotra. Sva Sankalpa Prakasha Stotra. And here's the verse. He's writing to Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami, expressing his heart through this verse of Raghunath Das Goswami. Quote, without worshipping the pollen of Shri Radha's lotus feet, without taking shelter of Vrindavan, which bears her footprints, without respectfully greeting the great souls whose hearts are filled with deep love for her, how will one be able to plunge into the nectar ocean of love for Lord Krishna? We need Radha's grace. So the saintly person, he took that letter with that very important verse, Raghunath Das Goswami. He gave it to his two Brahmin friends, and they very happily and very joyfully, let us say, and save it to Srila Jiva Goswami, made the long journey from Vrindavan to Andhra Pradesh. Now, that's a big state, a big place. And they were going anywhere and everywhere, inquiring from people, do you know Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami? So while searching far and wide, one day they came across a sadhu taking baths from a well, the well water. He was taking his bath. And they asked him, as they did many others, Baba, we are looking for a person named Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami. Do you know him, or of him, or where he lives? So the sadhu, he stopped his bath and he turned to them and he said, oh yes, I know him, but please tell me where you two are from. So those two brahmanas, they answered, oh, we are from Vrindavan, Vrindavan. And hearing the word Vrindavan, that sadhu immediately fell down unconscious onto the ground and was trembling in ecstasy. So this immediately attracted a crowd of local villagers, who then explained to the two brahmanas that the sadhu who fainted was in fact Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami himself. They said, he is Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami, and because he's a devotee of Krishna, upon hearing the name of Vrindavan, he fell unconscious in ecstasy. Now when Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami regained consciousness, the two brahmanas said to him, quote, we have come to take you to Braj on the order of Jiva Goswami. Now upon hearing this, Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami started laughing and laughing in ecstasy and dancing in ecstasy. Laughing and dancing in ecstasy. And I was reading, even without finishing his bath, he immediately began running towards Vrindavan. Just in your mind's eye, just try to see this. He's taking his bath. He immediately began running towards Vrindavan. In fact, some accounts say he ran all the way from Andhra Pradesh to Vrindavan. He ran the whole way. Now when he finally arrived in Braj some months later, as was the tradition, we mentioned this some months ago, as was the tradition, he went first to Govindaji's temple, where Raghunath Bhatta Goswami was lecturing on Srimad Bhagavatam, as he did every day. Now upon hearing the recitation, the nectarian words coming from the lotus mouth, the pure heart of Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, imbued with love for Braj and for Krishna and Vrindavan, Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami again fainted in ecstasy. Now seeing this, the devotees present, they sent a message to Srila Jiva Goswami, who very quickly came to the temple to see who was this visiting sadhu who fainted in ecstasy. And when Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami came back to external consciousness, Jiva Goswami came forward and said, Baba, who are you? And when Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami revealed his identity, Jiva Goswami started dancing in ecstasy. Harivo, Harivo, Hari. He was very happy. But without wasting a moment, he said, quote, my dear Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami, tell me, how can you write such beautiful poetry about Vrindavan without having taken shelter of Shri Radhika, and without the association of the Rasika devotees of Braj? So Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami became very humble. He said, yes, O Jiva Goswami, before you I am lower than a blade of grass. Please give me your shelter so that I can truly understand and experience what I write about and what is the real Vrindavan. So Jiva Goswami answered, very well, but I'm very busy with my service, so please take shelter of Srila Raghunath Bhatta Goswami. He does not have any disciples yet, so when he deems you fit, you may take Diksha, initiation from him. Unquote. Then Jiva Goswami said to Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, who had just finished his discourse on Srimad Bhagavatam, he said to him, this Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami is a high-class Brahmana and a devotee of Krishna from South India. Please accept him as your disciple and teach him the glories of Radha and Krishna. Vrindavaneshwari Srimati Radharani ki. So, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So, Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami started learning, or let us say deeply studying Srimad Bhagavatam from Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, and in a year's time, Raghunath Bhatta Goswami gave him Diksha, initiation into our Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, into the chanting of Hare Krishna. And Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami was actually the only disciple of Srila Raghunath Bhatta Goswami's only disciple. And I was reading that sometime later, Raghunath Bhatta Goswami gave the Srimad Bhagavatam that was given to him by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to his disciple, Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami. And when Raghunath Bhatta Goswami finally departed this world, Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami continued, as I said earlier, giving very deep discourses on Srimad Bhagavatam, following in the footsteps of his spiritual master. This is what we want to do. We want to follow in the footsteps of our spiritual master. Then we're always safe from the influence of the material energy and inspired to advance in Krishna consciousness, as Bhaktivinoda Thakur said to his spiritual master. I'm simply running behind you, shouting, Krishna, Krishna, Krishna. Hare Krishna. So, upon the departure of Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami also inherited his spiritual master's wooden shoes and a long tulsi garland that was worn by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and given to Raghunath Bhatta Goswami by the Lord. He inherited those precious items. So, one time, on the occasion of Vasanta Panchami, which is the first day of spring, Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami was sitting on the banks of the Yamuna, chanting a very beautiful Yamuna Ashtakam. Ashtakam means 8. So this Yamuna Ashtakam was 8 prayers that he composed in glorification of Yamuna, Mai. And suddenly, as we can expect, tears came from his eyes, which fell down his cheeks and mixed with the mud on the banks of the Yamuna. And looking down, Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami saw the top knot of a deity of Krishna. You know, sometimes our deities, they have a little top knot there. Krishna ties, Mother Yashoda ties his hair like that in a top knot. He saw the top knot of a deity of Krishna protruding from that spot. So his tears just, flowed from his eyes. He began digging in the mud. And several minutes later, he pulled out a very small, beautiful, black stone deity of Krishna, whom he later named Madan Mohan. And when Jiva Goswami was informed of Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami's find, he said, quote, "It is Madan Mohan's mercy upon him that he can continue the worship of Madan Mohan, which was interrupted for a very long time." So, like his spiritual master, Srila Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami became very famous for his lectures on Bhagavatam. And not only Gaudiya Vaishnavas, I was reading, would attend those discourses, but also members of other sampradayas as well, living in Vrindavan. They used to come and hear his katha also. So popular he was. Now also at that time, the king of Bharatpur, which is not far from Vrindavan, it's maybe a 45-minute drive. Palace is still there. At that time, the king of Bharatpur was also coming every day to hear the lectures of Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami, the king. He would come every day to hear the katha. And in time, he started developing a spirit of renunciation. He was even thinking of giving up his kingdom and becoming a renounced sadhu in Vrindavan. He would probably become renowned as well, having been the king and given up everything to live in Braj and just chant Hare Krishna. So he was getting this spirit of renunciation. Oh, maybe I should give everything up and just, live in Vrindavan. And when his wife, the queen, saw this transformation taking place in her husband, the king, because of the lectures of Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami, she became very worried, to the point that she came up with a plan to stop her husband from leaving the kingdom, from leaving her for all practical purposes. She came up with a plan to stop her husband's newfound spirit of renunciation. So one day, she called in her pregnant maid, who was 8 months pregnant, and offered her a large amount of money to go to the Srimad Bhagavatam lecture of Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami that day, and in front of the audience, stand up and announce that Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami was the father of the unborn child still in her womb. So that's what she did. She was being offered a large amount of money, the maid. So the maid of the queen came to Braj and went to Govindaji's temple, and there were many saints and sadhus and very important people there. And in the middle of the discourse, she started crying, perhaps realizing how foolish she was. She stood up anyway and called out, "Oh, Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami, you are becoming a famous devotee, but you have not told your disciples and the people in general that you made me pregnant 8 months ago." She actually did it. Needless to say, everyone was shocked. And then Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami, very, equipoised and calm, and he spoke up. He said, "My dear lady, of course this is not true. Perhaps you have done this only because you are in a desperate condition of life. As such, I pity you, and I am concerned about you." Now, hearing these compassionate words of Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami, this maidservant of the queen, she relented. And with tears in her eyes, she related in that public assembly that her accusation was false. And she related how the queen of Bharatpur had offered her money to do it. Now it's interesting that the king of Bharatpur was present for the lecture, and hearing this, he rose up and drew his sword. Said, I'm going back to my palace and I will behead my wife. But Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami, he said, no, you cannot do that. Do not do this, he said. This is all because your wife is so attached to you. You should know that your duty is not to renounce her or your kingdom, but to protect her and rule your kingdom as a Raja Rishi, a saintly person sitting on the throne. Better you stay in your palace in Bharatpur, and I will send my disciples daily to lecture on Srimad Bhagavatam for you and your good wife. So the king put his sword back in its covering, and he sat down. Yes, I will follow your instructions. So these are just some of the glories of this great devotee, Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami, the illustrious disciple of Raghunath Bhatta Goswami. And as a way that, we're learning how to approach Vrindavan, how to live in Vrindavan, and one day how to attain the eternal realm of Goloka Vrindavan in the spiritual world. These great devotees are taking us on this path through the 12 forests of Vrindavan, where our aim is pure love for Radha and Krishna. Jiva Goswami was instructing him in that way. So I would like to conclude with a verse today from Srimad Bhagavatam, 11th canto, 14th chapter, text number 24, which for me really personifies this personality of Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami. It's short but very sweet and very instructive. Quote, a devotee whose speech is sometimes choked up, whose heart melts, who cries continually and sometimes laughs, who feels ashamed and cries out loudly and then dances. A devotee thus fixed in loving service to me purifies the entire universe. Krishna is speaking. Let me recite it one more time. Krishna says, a devotee whose speech is sometimes choked up, whose heart melts, who cries continually and sometimes laughs, who feels ashamed and cries out loudly and then dances. A devotee thus fixed in loving service to me purifies the entire universe. So let us take shelter of Srila Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami, Srila Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan, all the acharyas who have come in their line, Srila Jiva Goswami, and our beloved spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada, who is for us the revealer of Sri Vrindavan Dham, Mayapur Dham, and Jagannath Puri. Thank you so much, Prabhu. We'll be back in a couple of days with our wanderings to the 12 forests of Vrindavan. Thank you so much.